I remember we were advised not to do that because you risked somebody having a heart attack in the audience. Can I just, I did a little prep here. This isn't just all off the cuff. Oh yeah. There's a pullback shot from Ewan McGregor, and he's come off heroin again, and he's trying to survive. Before he goes back on it again, he gets to experience what's on offer in his life without heroin. And he goes to the local club with his family, and there's a long, slow pullback from his face, his white, vampire-like face, really, as he's in withdrawal. The rest of the world is moving at hyper speed around him. I mean, nowadays there'd be post-production ways of doing it, but then we did it live. And I remember Brian Stefano, who's passed away a couple of years ago, sadly, the cinematographer. I described to him what I was imagining in the shot. And it was based on my dad, actually, and me being in these clubs. Because my dad used to be a big drinker, and I used to go as a kid and sit in the clubs while him and his mates would all be drinking. It was just felt like chaos all around, and I described it to all the actors and the extras about what they had to do with they'd have to make it so active and yet not be Keystone Cops. They just had to be realistic but constant action. Meanwhile, Brian ran the camera at like 4-8 frames a second or something like that, and pulled back very slowly over this track as we pulled away from Ewan. When we described it to Ewan as well, and Ewan immediately said, I'll have to slow down my breathing, won't I? Otherwise I'll look like I'm panting the whole time. And I said, well, a bit of panting won't necessarily be a bad thing, but do what you can. And he went into this meditative thing where he tried to slow down his breathing. It's quite interesting. I always remember him saying, he'd come up to me a few times when we were filming and saying, I'm not doing enough, am I? He said, I watched Bobby Carlyle and Ewan Bremner playing Spud and Begbie and, where everybody's going crazy all around me, and I don't appear to be doing anything. And I said, yeah, you're the centre of this insanity. You're the still centre that people will believe in.
It seems, however, I really am the luckiest guy in the world. Several years of addiction right in the middle of an epidemic, surrounded by the living dead.
So 28 days later, the one I was going to pick for this, so everybody not everybody, but a lot of people talk about the beginning and the deserted London scenes and Cillian Murphy wandering around. There's a particular bit of that I really love, which is that he's walking through what we call Centre Point. And there's this very famous, and it's never been used, this building Centre Point. It's very shocking. It's this beautiful tower block of office buildings called Centre Point. And behind it, there's this incredible image of a Benetton advert. And Benetton at the time were these really dazzlingly colourful, youthful images, very full of hope, very ironic given what had happened. And it wasn't so much that bit, it's that he approaches this, there's this Mercedes car, and he goes to reach the handle because he obviously thinks I'll travel by car, that's obviously what his brain's thinking, and the alarm goes off. The reason I mentioned it is that we have a wonderful bit of music through that sequence called East Hastings by this extraordinary Canadian band called Godspeed You Black Emperor. Before we got permission from Godspeed You Black Emperor to use the music, we did a test screening, a small test screening with the beginning, the whole journey in silence, in absolute silence as he wandered around London. There's no atmosphere because there isn't anything happening. There's a couple of birds fluttering and that's about it. And when it got to that bit, where he touched the handle of the Mercedes car and the alarm went off, people jumped out of their seats. And we were literally advised, I remember we were advised not to do that because you risked somebody having a heart attack in the audience. Somebody said that to us quite seriously. You can't do that. We wanted the Godspeed track anyway on it, but it was quite interesting that if you just draw people in enough, you might be able to create medical emergencies, which nobody wants.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mercury.
Sunshine has a lot of CG in it, obviously, because you can't get close enough to the sun to record it. You have to recreate it, obviously, because you can't see it anyway, because in our spectrum it has to be so lensed and heavily coloured anyway for the way that we perceive it. But the one I wanted to pick out was the moment where the crew are very excited because on their journey towards the sun, they're going to pass Mercury. They all turn up in the viewing room, in the observation room, and then you see Mercury appear, and it is basically a pinhead. It's the tiniest little speck passing across the sun in front of them. And it's wonderful because it gives you the sense of the scale of what you're dealing with here. You're still tens of millions of miles from the sun, and yet a planet in front of it. In planets we have a kind of sense of the size of planets because we live on one, but we have no sense of the size of the sun because you can't even look at it from 93 million miles away without it blinding you. And so it was just to give a sense of scale. It was a very unexpected use of CG, really, as a lovely moment. And I like, in your series, I've watched a few of these, and I like what Ridley Scott says about CG. There's such kind of like, oh, I hate CG or I like CG or whatever. He just says it's a tool that you have to use, to get at what you want. And that was a perfect example of it. Slumdog Millionaire, yeah, it was, to film in India is, and especially in Mumbai, is a kind of gift. I mean, it just gives and gives and gives all the time to you. Stimulus overload. It's how to contain it in a way. There's a particular shot of Latika. She's at a railway station, and Dev Patel is looking down at her, and it's before she's taken away by gangsters. There's just a shot that zooms in on her as she looks up, and the train goes past behind her. And we shot it on a Canon, a 35mm camera, and we shot it on a series that it's like 12, 14 frames a second, but it's hyper rich image, and obviously benefits from the texture of the light in India and the atmosphere that's everywhere everywhere around you, and the light is magnificent. And that shot of her, she looks up at him, is one of the most romantic things I've ever shot, and there should always be a place for romance, really. I'd love to use that camera again, and I'm thinking of it for a project we're thinking of in the future. I like using different formats. I like disrupting the patina of perfection that sometimes is arresting and certainly obsesses cinematographers sometimes. I like to disrupt that, and format change often does that because it poses matching problems, it poses editing problems, but I think of those as opportunities. It's like the MTV generation have changed everything. The palette that people can absorb, provided it's interesting enough, provided the kernel of the idea, they'll absorb almost anything in terms of the quality of the image. If they believe that what you're trying to do is for a purpose, and if they believe the people who are doing it, the actors, really. The one I'd really love to talk about, I don't think you're allowed to show. As an alternative, I would say that the hillside with the tree and the pack of infected who arrive. And I mention it only because it contains clues to the way that the virus has survived. Because these films the concentration tends to be on how have the humans survived, and that's part of the pleasure, is imagining, oh, well, could I do that? Could I do subsistence farming? Could I hunker down and man the barricades? And, all that kind of, we like that kind of like vicarious existence, speculating about that kind of thing. But I think the more interesting question is that the virus survives and what it does to survive. Because the creatures in the original film, the infected, they burn up so much energy in their rage, that so much calories, basically, they burn, that they would die very quickly. They'd starve very quickly unless they learnt to eat. And to learn to eat means to learn to hunt. And you immediately think, there will be ones of them who will survive. And you see that quite graphically in some of the stuff we shot on this Panasonic EU123 camera, which is this night camera. But again, the information that's in the shot, the horizon shot, is that they are organising. They're working as a pack. They're no longer random. And when you hunt in a pack like that, there's a leader. And that's the other creature that you see up on the hillside. It's not immediately readable unless you watch unless you watch this kind of show and kind of hear this kind of information. But I think it does act on people that it's working differently now. I loved how it was the opportunity to surprisingly show how the virus survives. The authorities imagine they'll isolate the UK and let the thing burn itself out. And there is evidence of viruses burning themselves out, that they're too virulent, they move too quickly to spread widely enough. But we also know from our own experiences of COVID that viruses mutate and evolve, and sometimes to our benefit and sometimes not. Any shots you want to show from Apocalypse Now. That film and that man, I watched his piece for you. The 70s produced some amazing directors in America, truly amazing, who moved cinema forward in ways that I think history will appreciate even more than we do. But he is, to have produced films like The Godfather and to have produced Apocalypse Now, marks him out as a true prophet. I met him once and I was just jelly meeting him. I mean, I think the poor man was so embarrassed that this guy, I was just like, because you realise when you make films, you realise to reach that kind of film with that kind of ambition, that kind of relentless ambition, and yet it's focused, and I don't even care. The 5-hour version is still focused. It's like, and almost every shot of it. I was trying to think, for this section of this, which shot, but just to pick one shot would just diminish it. There's so many, the ride of the Valkyrie, Sheen at the beginning, Brando at the end. It's just endless shots that you can use from it. So yeah.